Hi, I'm Kevin Hatley and welcome to Kevin Hatley Photography in my office. This is a channel that I've set up to share my experiences of wildlife and nature with others. So let's go. It's my belief that wildlife photography is the most difficult of all the genres of photography. Why is that, you may ask? Well, we're not in a studio environment where the photographer is completely in control of everything. Our target, wildlife, has a mind of its own and it's going to decide what it's going to do, where it's going to do it and how it's going to do it. So as a wildlife photographer, you have to be able to determine where that wildlife is going to turn up, and you have to be in a position to get the images that you're after. I spent 24 years in the British Army, and during that time I spent a number of years in a reconnaissance role. So what I want to do in this video is share with you some of that knowledge and experience. Again, I'm not going to teach you how to be an SAS sniper, it's just about applying some basic sense, along with my previous video on fieldcraft skills where I covered the basic 5 steps or tips to fieldcraft in the field. Okay, what I want to do in this video is explain to you what a recce is, talk about the preparation and planning you need to do before you actually go out and do a recce. We'll look at the equipment that I would recommend that you should carry with you when you do a recce, and what we'll do along the way is share with you my top 5 tips on a wildlife recce. So what is a reconnaissance, or a recce for short? Well, a recce is basically a survey to gather information, with the aim being in wildlife to gather as much information as we can about the subject that we want to photograph. One saying that I will give you from my army days is, we often said that time spent on reconnaissance is seldom wasted, and certainly the more time you put into your recce when you're recceing wildlife, I'm sure the more that you're going to get out of it. So let's go and do a recce. Okay, tip number 5 in carrying out a reconnaissance for wildlife photography is all to do about research. If you want to get close to your subject, you must know as much as possible about it, its habits, its environment, and how it actually survives in that environment. Therefore, you have to be in the right place at the right time. Kingfishers are a classic example. They're difficult to get near to. However, the more you know about their habits, their environment, and especially their call, they will all help you to get closer to the kingfisher and get the photographs that you're after. My recce's always begin here at my computer, and it's here that I will gather all the information that I think that I'm going to need in order to plan my recce in the future. Things that I'll be looking at are Google to research my subject, Google Maps to look at the ground, YouTube to look at videos on my subject, and I'll also refer to books in my research. So you've done all your research, you've found about as much information as you possibly can about your subject. So tip number 4 in doing a wildlife recce is all about planning. There's a phrase that I've often heard saying, prior preparation and planning prevents piss poor performance. I have amended that slightly to stand for prior preparation and planning prevents piss poor photography. Planning, again, for me, begins here at my computer. As I've said, once I've researched my subject, I'll turn then and look at the following areas that I believe that you need to look at before you go out onto the ground. And as an example, I'll talk about the video that I did on how to photograph hares, which is on my playlist, and I'll use that to demonstrate to you how I went about photographing the hares. One of the first things I'll do is what's known as a map appreciation. So I have my own map of my local area. I always like to look at a map physically in my hand. And the kind of things that I'm going to be looking for are things like routes. How am I going to actually get to the area? Parking. Where am I going to park my car? Are there areas to park the car? And that's what Google Maps is really good for. The other thing you need to think about as well is the directions of the sun.
most wildlife subjects are most active first thing in the morning or last thing at night. So you need to have a rough idea of where the sun is, where it's going to come up in the morning, where it's going to go down at night. And also try and think about things like prevalent wind direction. If there's one thing that will give the game away, especially when you're trying to look at things like deer, badgers, foxes or hare, is smell. So wind direction plays a very important part as well. I'm also going to have a look on my map and on Google Maps to see if there's areas of approach that I'll be able to make that could maybe provide cover for me. Am I going to be on foot, or am I going to be using my car? And one other really important thing is, especially here in the UK, is the land that you're actually looking to go on to photograph your wildlife. Is it private? If it is, you're going to need the landowner's permission. And again, I did a video on how to go about asking and getting the permission of a landowner to go on it to photograph the wildlife that's there.
Okay, tip number 3 in carrying out wildlife recce is all to do with equipment. What you need to do is keep your equipment that you carry down to a minimum. Remember, recce is really all about trying to get in a position to observe the wildlife with a minimum disturbance. The more equipment you carry, the more difficult that is. That's why I would never carry a tripod on a recce. Just gets in the way. And the kit that I would recommend is, I carry all my kit in this little stool. I get all my kit in this stool, which I can sit on. You can find yourself at times spending a lot of time sitting in one position, so you need to be as comfortable as possible. Obviously, binoculars, you need a nice good pair of binos. I carry an R5 with a 300 to 500 millimeter lens on it. I carry a bean bag, and the bean bag that I use is this one here, by Hatley, and I'll leave a link to his site where you can get them from. I highly recommend them, really good. Mobile phone, water, you're going about for a while, and I also carry a camera trap with me. This field behind me, a couple of days ago, I saw some deer in it, but running down the edge here, there is a ditch that runs all the way down the field, and the deer cross that ditch at some point. So what I'll be doing after I finish filming here is I'm going to go and try and find the crossing point, and then what I'll do is I'll put my camera trap out, and they're a great aid for recce and gathering information. Again, you don't need to be dressing up like an SS sniper to carry out a wildlife recce. It really depends on the location that you're going to be in. So if you're in a local park, or you're going to walk around a nature reserve, you don't want to be walking around in full-blown camo gear. It's just not the place, and it's not the environment, and it's not needed because the wildlife are used to people walking around in those types of spaces. However, it could be a different story altogether once you're out in the countryside itself. And that will depend again here on the target species that you're after. The clothing that I would recommend is just what I've got here. A lightweight 3D camel jacket, I've got the trousers that goes with it, or the heavier type DPM camouflage jacket for obviously it's a nice sunny warm day today. You wear this all day long, it could get a bit uncomfortable. And the scrim nets, can't emphasize just how good these are for simply just putting over yourself or putting over your camera as you're actually out in the field photographing wildlife. Okay, tip number 2 in wildlife recce is all about timing. In the fields that are around here, there are hares. This is where I come to photograph them, and when we talk about timing, especially things like hares or owls, it's at certain times of the day that you're going to get your best opportunities, and that's during the golden hour. So that's either it's sunset or sunrise, so that means early mornings and late evenings, but you've got to know your subject, and this is the type of area that you're going to find them in. When it comes to timing, it's not just about the time of the day, it's also about the time of the year. And again, this goes back to knowing your subject. So for instance, best time of the year that I would say for photographing hares is in March. They talk about the Mad March hare, and there's a lot of myth around that subject, and I covered that in my video on how to photograph hares. The reason March is so good is when the grass is so low, but actually the testosterone in the male hares is actually at its peak, and that's when they start to get really interested in the box, and that's when you're going to get them boxing. Again, when it comes to photographing things like the barn owl, time of year, May, June, they've got young in the nest, they need to feed, so the parents are out and about all the time hunting, and you'll even get them during the day. So timing is not just about the time of the day, it's about the time of the year. So tip number 2, wildlife recce, is timing. Get your timing right. I'll just give you a very quick reminder of something that I spoke about in my last video on fieldcraft tips, and that's to do with the circle of fear and how animals perceive danger in the wild. And here's that summary now. It's very important to understand. The circle of fear is 4 circles within which the wildlife is at the centre of the circle, and from the outside to the inside you have 4 different levels of threat from the wildlife's perspective. On the outside circle, level 4, everything is absolutely normal, they're going about the business, they're not concerned. When you get into circle number 3, they have an awareness, but they still go about their everyday business. When you get to circle number 2, it's when things can rapidly change, and that's when they're alert to something. They're alert to there's something out there that could pose a danger to them. Once you get into circle number 1, it's game over, they're gone. You've got too close. So it's important to understand the circle of fear. Normal activity, awareness, alertness, and then flight. Make sure that all your equipment and your camera are prepared before you step off, and I normally do that at my car and carry out what I go through some final checks, and here they are now. Okay, final checks that I'll do whilst I'm at the car is I'm going to check my equipment, I'm going to check my clothing, make sure everything is at hand, and I'm also going to check my camera. Things that I'm checking for are basically, I've really checked that everything's packed at home before I come out. The really final check is really all about denoising, making sure that there's nothing rattling, both on me and on my equipment. So that's just a strap flapping in the wind. Yeah, that's okay. And then myself, I'll just give a little bit. Yeah, there's nothing rattling, there's no keys, there's no change. That's basically the checks that I'll do on myself before I move off. Final check that I'm going to do before I actually move off and start my recce is I'm just going to check my camera to make sure that I've got a good exposure setting. I have a go-to setting, which is basically f8, 1/1000th of a second, and auto ISO. Now the reason I set it at that is because I know that if I bring the camera up to my eye, if I go 3 clicks to the left, it's 1/500th of a second, and if I go 3 clicks to the right, it's 1/2000th of a second. So that allows me, if I'm looking at a stationary target, I can bring my camera up to my eye, go 1, 2, 3 to the left, I'm at 1/500th of a second, which is great for portrait shots, 500mm lens, and vice versa, if it's a bird in flight, 3 clicks to the right, and it's 1/2000th of a second. And the final check is just to check my histogram. Now what I'll do is I'll take a test shot against a neutral background. So whether it's the grass or up against a nice blue sky, they will both give you a good balanced exposure setting to start the day off. Okay, tip number 5 on how to carry out a recce is all about how you actually go out approaching the recce itself. Now, different locations and different terrain will require different approaches. For instance, if you're in open countryside where you're really exposed, you're going to have to be careful how you move. The 2 things that will give you away are movement and sound. If you're in a local park or you're in your nature reserve, then your approach is going to be completely different. You don't need to be cammed up or anything like that, as I kind of mentioned earlier on. Water features. Can you actually get near a water feature in your car? I was fortunate enough to go out to the Isle of Mull a number of years ago, and I did a recce to try and find otters. I did that from a car right next to the lock side, and once I'd actually located the otter, I was able to get out my car and actually approach it on foot. So there's two types of recce, it's either mobile or on foot. Your approach is all about how you move and how much noise you generate, and that's what you need to be careful about. How quickly you go about it? Well, if I'm out on the ground, I'm going to walk at a pace that's slightly slower than normal walking pace until I have an encounter with wildlife. Awareness, you've got to make sure that you're constantly keeping an eye open and listening. Keep your eye open for animal tracks or signs of animals, and listening for calls of birds especially. Are great indicators, especially the alarm calls. If you are going to move, keep yourself low. Don't stare directly at your subject. You wouldn't like me walking up to you with a camera in my hand, staring at you and taking pictures. Certainly the wildlife don't, and they'll be gone. Alert stage number 4, they're gone, it's all over, it's finished. And if you do move, try and move, if possible, depending on the cover that's available. Remember what I said, always try and keep as close to cover as possible, so that if you do have to stop, you just stop, move into the cover, get down, keep yourself low and observe your target. I just want to briefly talk about what I call a stop point. A stop point is a point that you come across where you could find yourself completely exposed. It could be a gap in a hedge, it could be a track junction, or it could be a space where you're moving from cover into no cover. And those types of positions, you have to be very careful how you move. And it's all about just stopping, as I said, think about what you're going to do, make your observation, be patient in what you're doing, and keep yourself low. Don't try and not silhouette yourself if at all possible. One of the biggest tips in wildlife photography is always to try and get at eye level with your subject, and you've got to be patient. Wildlife photography, you're going to find yourself at times in a position where you're going to have to sit, you're going to have to wait, and you're going to have to be patient, and that takes time. And that's why I have this little stool, which I take with me. If I think that I'm going to have to be sitting down for a while, I'll get my stool, I'll pull it up against a tree, I'll get myself nice and comfortable, and I'll just sit and I'll take time to observe and listen. Gather as much information as possible from the recce itself, and then once you've done that, you can then plan the time and your date, because you know about your subject, you've done your research, you've done your planning, you've got your kit together, you know the right time and the right place to be. And the final thing is how you actually approach, get into your final position. Remember to try and keep low at eye level and get the photographs that you're after. Hopefully some of them like these. As I said at the beginning of the video, time spent on reconnaissance is seldom wasted. Wildlife are creatures of habits. You need to try and find out what those habits are, and the only way to do that is to know your subject and to go out and do a recce so that you've got as much information as possible so that you can plan it, get into position and get the images that you're after. Okay, all I would ask is that if you've liked this video, could I ask you to hit the like button? Could I also ask you to subscribe to my channel, Kevin Hatley Photography. It's completely free, it doesn't cost anything, and what it does is it just helps me to grow my channel and bring to you my knowledge and my experience of wildlife photography. I always keep saying I am always learning, and what I want to do with my channel is share that knowledge and experience with other wildlife photographers. So until the next time, stay safe, take care, and I hope to see you soon. Bye for now.